What's good, YouTube? Welcome back to the YGOHouse, where today we are taking a look at the absolute powerhouse of a deck that is TEARLAMENTS ISHIZU. This deck has taken over the Yu-Gi-Oh meta, has become a Tier 0 format, representing 28 of 32 decks in Top Cut last week at the YCS Pasadena. It's going to be getting a lot more play at YCS Dortmund. I figured we wouldn't waste any more time and we'd bring you guys a deck profile for this one. I am, of course, a TEARLAMENTS OG, and I really have appreciated this deck. I know it's really powerful. It's not good against, not good to play against this deck, but I am a huge fan of TEARLAMENTS alone, so I figured we'd bring you guys this deck profile. Before we get into it though, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out our TikTok and our Twitter in the links down below. Without further ado, let's get straight into this. We are of course running 3 copies of TEARLAMENTS Rhinoheart. This deck is really interesting in that it doesn't really have a necessary starter, but this is the dedicated normal summon at least for the deck. I don't think you can cut it down to 2, I guess you can kind of get away with it, but for me I really feel comfortable with this at 3. I always like having this, whether it's to be able to special summon it off of Kikalos, or normal summon itself, or even special summon itself from grave. It's just too much utility. It's another level 4 for the deck that allows you to get into rank 4 plays, and of course the Armageddon Knight, the Foolish Burial effect on this card is just too good for you to be dropping it any less than 3. Really like the consistency of it, and you really do need some dedicated normal summons in this deck still. Moving on, we have 3 copies of TEARLAMENTS Shiren, the extender of the group, an absolutely insane card that allows you to put things like a YGO and even Kelbeck in the grave to mill 5, as well as the mill 3 effect that it has on top of that, or even trigger or just get TEARLAMENTS names in the graveyard for later use. It being a level 4 gives it even more utility. This might be the best of the actual standard TEARLAMENTS lineup. It's super insane to have this type of extension, really necessary to be running this one at 3. We of course have TEARLAMENTS Havness at 3, the hand trap of the deck, allowing you to mill your opponent's turn, gives you opportunities for some turn 0 plays, as well as being able to just fuse in your opponent's turn for disruption with things like Kaleido Heart. It's just so insane that this card even exists at 3. If there's any card that could get sniped on the ban list in the near future, I expect it to be Havness, just because it allows too much potential to play on your opponent's turn, and that's where I feel like the unfair element of this deck definitely comes into play. Next, of course, we have 3 copies of TEARLAMENTS Merly, which is just an insane card simply because it's a level 2. The access that this card has to Sprite Sprint and Sprite Elf is just ridiculous. Being able to special summon on your opponent's turn and mill 3 with something like Sprite Elf, or being able to dump this at the end of your combo with something like Sprite Sprint to get your last fusion off is just way too good in this deck. Moving on to the new stuff, we have 3 copies of Keldo the Sacred Protector, a new ISHIZU card. These cards all got revamped, and this one may be the best of them all alongside Kelbeck. Similar to Shiren, this one discards and searches as part of its full effect, so you have to disrupt it in the hand, which makes it really strong. The ability to dump either Kelbeck or a YGO, and even something like Ludora or even another copy of itself is super powerful. Being able to get these cards into the graveyard is super important because banishing it from field or grave, yes, even field, to target 3 cards and shuffle them back into the deck is just too good. This allows you to kind of protect yourself from Bestials. If your opponent targets one of your Bestial monsters in the graveyard, it allows you to shuffle those targets back into the deck so that they can't get the effect of the Bestials off. Even though you won't be able to get the fusion summon off yourself, it can be super valuable in a grind game or even in some more simplistic game states to keep those big bodies off the field. This card's super important, especially since it searches Kelbeck. Of course, if you're running 3 copies of Keldo, you're running 3 copies of Ludora as well. This card's very similar to Keldo, but it doesn't actually have to place the Gravekeeper's Trap from your deck, similar to how Keldo doesn't have to search the monster. This card's really good. It's a level 4 just like Keldo, so it gets you into rank 4 plays and does the exact same thing on field and in graveyard as Keldo. So having 2 monsters that have the same effects, very similar to how the TEARLAMENTS have 3 monsters who have the same effects in grave, basically means you're running 6 copies of the same card, which just boosts your consistency way too much. The fact that these cards are in pairs like this just takes the top off of their potential. Just insane cards. Moving on to Kelbeck and a YGO. I know there should be 3 Kelbeck, but unfortunately we only have 2. The third is just not shown up in the mail yet. Kelbeck is absolutely insane, allowing you to target any special summon monster your opponent controls and bounce it back to the hand while special summoning this card if a card is sent from the hand or deck to your opponent's graveyard. So in the mirror match, this is insane, but against pretty much any deck it's going to come up. And then the YGO does the same thing in terms of its trigger condition, but only special summons a level 4 Earth Fairy from the grave. So the fact that it requires setup makes it a little less good than Kelbeck, but both of these cards, if they're sent to the graveyard by anything, allow you to mill both players' decks for 5. This absolutely takes the potential of the TEARLAMENTS engine above and beyond It makes consistency that much better. There's no more whiffing on your Havness 3. You have cards that are just so much better at getting things into the grave. You can mill up to 20 cards in a turn, and that right there, not just getting your cards in the grave, but getting your opponent's key cards into the grave. Their key one-ofs, their power spells, can seriously just win you the duel. These cards are absolutely broken. Kelbeck is the best of the ISHIZU cards in my opinion. It's between that and Keldo because Keldo searches it, but Kelbeck has to be the MVP. And then of course we are running one copy of Diviner of the Herald. This acts as a pseudo-normal summon, but really you're only going to be reviving this off of Elf. You're going to be milling your deck so much that you're more than likely going to see this card. And even if you don't, having something like a Smart Sprint to access this card and follow up is insane. Its ability to send Kelbeck or Guido or even Mudor and Keldo if you really need them to the grave, to turn itself into a level 6, to synchro summon with any of the TEARLAMENTS that are level 4, giving you Baron the Floor is just absolutely broken, but also triggering the effects of Kelbeck and Guido. This card's super good for the utility it brings. And then of course, since all of our ISHIZU cards are fairies, Herald of the Orange Light is absolutely necessary to stop some things like Dimension Shifter. Dimension Shifter absolutely kills this deck and can cause your turns to just completely fall flat on its face. Having an answer to that, as well as the Bistros and something like Orange Light, is insane, and the fact that it pairs with Kelbeck and Guido to even mill 5 on that resolution is just that much better. So this card is not going to stay in the deck. This is supposed to be the third copy of Kelbeck, but I did just want to touch on the fact that you can run the Bistro engine in this deck. And if there's one Bistro that you should be running, I think it's probably Druid's Worm. This card pairs really well with Celiac, allowing you to have an additional send to the graveyard and an additional disruption, as well as being a pretty big body. The fact that it's a level 6 and you can kind of pair this with Diviner of the Herald for an extra deck monster you'll see later is pretty cool too. So if you are going to run just a small Bistro package, Druid's Worm is probably the one you want to go for in this deck. Of course, we are running 3 copies of the Primeval Planet Perla Reino. This card is essential to the entire strategy. It's absolutely necessary to run this card at 3. You can get away with it if you can't afford it to run it at 1 or even 2, but you really do want the 3. You want to see this card as often as possible to get your TEARLAMENTS play started. It provides disruption and removal in the form of that pop, and it actually combos with the ISHIZU cards. If you target just one of your TEARLAMENTS monsters and some of your opponent's monsters for some disruption, on resolution, because an Aqua was shuffled in, you get the pop a card on the field. And that interaction in itself is just really stupid. The fact that these cards pair so well together, insane card. Definitely needed at 3. For the rest of our TEARLAMENTS spells, we are on 2 copies of Scream and 1 Heartbeat. These cards are kind of self-explanatory. Scream is just really powerful at being able to give you even more mills, but also draining your opponent's monsters of 500 attack can be pretty relevant when you're looking for game. Also, its ability to search a trap, being Crime or Celiac, is just really good. So in my eyes, you always kind of want to have 1 to search and 1 to send. You can get away with 1, but honestly I really like having this in my opening hand. Heartbeat is just a really good in-archetype answer to Mystic Mine or even pesky floodgates like Dimension Fissure and Macrocosmos, which I definitely expect to see a lot of, especially with the Kashtira support that's coming out in February. The fact that this can add a TEARLAMENTS trap is kind of not that good, but in some scenarios in game 1s and even games where you might side in another copy of this card, it allows you to bring back some of your resources, so still a really valuable card. For our TEARLAMENTS traps, we are on 2 copies of Celiac and 1 Crime. The idea behind 2 Celiac, just like Scream, is that I want to have 1 to dump and I want to have 1 that I have in my hand or to search. This card's insane, probably the best trap that the deck has. Being able to negate a monster is really good, but the fact that you can send any monster on your field to the grave, including something like a Druid's Worm if you decide to run it, is just way too powerful. Its ability when it's sent to the grave to search its TEARLAMENTS monster is just that much better, because say you have something like a Rule Kalos on field, using its negate and then sending this card to the grave allows you to then search Havness, which gives you even more interruption on your opponent's turn. Super good. And then Crime, being an Omni Trap, is just super good. All archetypes that have them generally run it at 1, but now that we have another searcher in the form of Scream, it becomes way better because you don't have to waste your Kit Kalos searcher dump on this card specifically. It's just way too good not to have. Moving into our power spells, we are on 3 copies of Triple Tactics Talent, aka the Finals MVP for Hani. This card's absolutely insane, whether it's drawing 2 cards, taking control of a monster in the mirror match or even beyond, or being able to shuffle something back into the deck. This card's way too good. Every deck now, including TEARLAMENTS, has effects that they're going to activate on your turn. Before, this card didn't see as much play because TEARLAMENTS really didn't run a lot of hand traps outside of Havness, but with things like Kelbeck, with things like Havness, and now Herald of the Orange Light being run, this card's going to be live pretty much every game you have, and it's just too good not to be running. You definitely can make the argument for cutting it to 2, but I really like it at 3. And then for our final 2 cards, as our boy Pack would say, the guide cards, basically should be called TEARLAMENTS Instant Fusion and TEARLAMENTS Terraforming. These cards are absolutely broken in this deck. Instant Fusion is almost a 1-card win con at this point because getting Kikalos on the field, if you're uninterrupted, can generate so much advantage that you win the game and you still have 4 cards in your hand. And then just having the extra copy of Pearl Areno or thinning your deck out to 38 can be super key for something like Terraforming. If you're running a field spell, you're probably running it. These cards are pretty self-explanatory. Moving on to the extra deck, we are running 1 copy of Kick Kalos, 1 copy of Rule Kalos, and 1 copy of Kaleido Heart. Kick Kalos at 1 is pretty good now because you have the ISHIZU cards, as well as something like a Crime even, to get this card if it is banished back into the deck, or if it's about to be banished with something like a Bistro back into the deck. This card's absolutely insane. It is like the focal point of the deck, and Rule Kalos just gives TEARLAMENTS an additional boss monster to end on. It is a pretty good negate. It is the answer to Nibiru, so you can't really even Nibiru this deck. And then of course Kaleido Heart has been broken ever since Poke came out. The ability to target a card and just shovel it back into the deck is one of the best forms of removal, and having it on a card in this broken of an archetype is just way too good. For the rest of our fusion monsters, we have 1 copy of Muddragon of the Swamp, 1 copy of Garura, and 1 copy of Dragostapelia. Now, Muddragon of the Swamp is definitely a lot harder to summon in this deck now because you just don't really play anything that's a dark and not an aqua, unless you're playing the Bistros or you get something like a Dark the Dark Charmer or one of these other 2 into the graveyard. Garura is insane when you're able to pair this with something like Diviner to synchro into Barone and get the draw, or even link this off for Dark. It's just way too good, and even sometimes being able to deal that extra bit of damage. It does 4k under Pearl Areno if it attacks directly, which is half of your opponent's life points. Really strong card. And then Dragostapelia being able to go into it on your opponent's turn to provide a negate, and then even against some decks like Kashtira, which is going to be really good in the near future, and something like Sprite currently, the level manipulation to keep Xyz plays offline is super good as well. Absolutely broken cards, but you definitely don't need to go more than these 3. Our 1 synchro is of course Bear on the Floor. Don't really think a lot needs to be said about this card. It pops any card on the field, including your own, so in like a grind game or a game you need damage, being able to pop a card, a TEARLAMENTS on your field to get that additional fuse, to get that additional damage, can be really key. And then having the Omni Negate is really strong as well, but the ability to actually tag itself out comes up a lot more often than you think. Because this deck can recur Diviner or the Herald from the graveyard with something like Elf, you can actually go into this card multiple times across the duel. Although you probably won't find yourself in that much of a grind game, its utility to get back into something like a Kaleido Heart or even something like a Rule Kalos is super important. Moving into our Xyz package, our rank 4s are Baguska, Time Thief Redoer, and Abyss Dweller. Baguska is really only in here for Flunder matchups. This card does a lot of work against Flunder. It's decent against Sprite, but really not that great. They can get around it. But Time Thief Redoer is definitely the most cuttable of the 3. I've had a hard time really committing to keeping it in, but during testing, sometimes that additional fusion can come up, as well as the knowledge that you can gain of your opponent's deck by stealing a card can be really key as well. Abyss Dweller is essentially an FTK against the deck, and some people have been clamoring for this card to be banned, simply because it can make the mirror match uninteractive. But honestly, if you're running a rogue deck that has level 4s, Abyss Dweller is one of the only ways to beat TEARLAMENTS, so I can kind of see the argument for both. But all 3 of these cards are pretty good and have their place, but Redoer is definitely the most expendable of the 3. Moving into our last 2 Xyz monsters, we have Wallow, the founder of Judge Dragons, and Divine Arsenal AA Zeus. Wallow is actually a really good card. If you're running the Bistro engine, I definitely recommend you run it. I have the 1 Druid Swarm in here, of course, as a placeholder, but if I were running a larger Bistro package, which I was actually kind of contemplating, being able to steal a Bistro out of your opponent's graveyard and use that level 6 to go into a Wallow is really key. This could of course be something like a Beatrice, but the ability to shuffle a card back into the deck, or take it and put it on your side of the field and give all of your monsters plus 100 for each card in the grave. This card's actually really powerful, and it's a pretty cool tech that I saw Jesse Cotton running, so I figured I might as well hop on it as well. Been testing and it's running out really well. And then Zeus is pretty self-explanatory. If you're able to go like Abyss Dweller Zeus, you pretty much wrap up the game right then and there, triggering all your tier names, or even triggering like a Kaleido Heart or a little Kalos, so you just wipe your opponent's board and get yours back. It's just way too powerful in any Xyz deck. Moving on to our last 3 cards, you have your Link 2 package, Dark the Dark Charmer, Sprite Elf, and Sprite Sprint. Dark the Dark Charmer is insane in this format, being able to steal any TEARLAMENTS from the grave, or even a stray Bestial, to be able to go into Elf or Sprint is just super strong. And then if this card is destroyed, I believe you're able to search both Havness and Shiren off of this card, giving you follow-up, which is insane. Elf and Sprint work really well with Merle, as well as Diviner of the Herald, so they both find places in the deck. Sprint at the end of your combo to get that last fusion off is really key, and then Elf continuously recurring level 2s out of the graveyard just creates so much frustration for your opponent, and just another layer of kind of interruption, disruption that your opponent has to deal with. You can go larger on this package. I know some people are still running like IP, Avermax, Borolo Dragon to get over something like Avermax, but for me, this package is pretty condensed. You're going to go into them pretty often, and you really don't need to go into them again. Once you resolve Dark's effect, or even Elf's effect once, you're pretty much going to win the duel. So, super small Link package, but it all works out in the end because of the advantage that they give you. So that is going to do it for today's deck profile on TEARLAMENTS ISHIZU. Hopefully you all enjoyed. I hope you guys are somehow enjoying this format. I know it's tier 0. I know this deck kind of blows everything out of the water, it seems, right now. But please be mindful to build your deck to counter this one until that ban list hits. It's the only way you're really going to be able to play. The deck is still really fun and really rewarding if you know how to play it, because it's not easy. You can't just pick this deck up and be good at it. You have to know what you're doing, when and what to trigger, when and where to trigger them. Super important. It's very satisfying when you play a high level game with this deck, because it's just that potent and that powerful. I know it's kind of creeping everything out of the meta, but until we get that ban list, please be aware this deck is going to be rampant. It's very strong, very satisfying to play. However, if you guys did enjoy, please leave a like and a comment down below. Remember to check out our Twitter as well as our TikTok down in the descriptions below. Hope you all enjoy. Everyone's welcome in the YGOHouse. Peace, y'all.